UPS just announced they are going to eliminate 30,000 new jobs and close 24 facilities this year. But this really shouldn't be much of a surprise, guys. In 2025, UPS terminated 48,000 jobs and closed 93 buildings. It's pretty clear that major shifts are happening in the delivery and logistics market. But what I find really interesting is not necessarily layoffs are happening, although we'll cover that, but who's being laid off. It's really fascinating to me, the roles that are being eliminated today and the new roles that are going to be important in the future. This has been a major theme on the channel recently, is what are the problems that are not going to be relevant to be solved in the future because AI and machines will be solving them? And what are the problems that we as men need to be focused on in order to remain relevant, respected, and financially free? How do we actually survive in a world where so much technological change is happening? So we're going to cover who is being fired and who's not. But first, I want to just take a closer look at what is actually causing the layoffs at UPS, because there's a few theories and I want to just kind of cover them real quick. So the CEO, Carol Tome, said, quote, "We're in the first 6 months of our Amazon accelerated glide down plan. And for the full year 2026, we intend to glide down another 1 million pieces per day while continuing to reconfigure our network." And basically what that means is they don't want to be delivering as much, which sounds counterintuitive. UPS is a delivery company, the United Parcel Service. So if your job is to deliver things, why would you want to deliver less? Well, last year, UPS announced that it wanted to slash millions of low profit deliveries for Amazon. You see all those Amazon trucks driving around, even UPS trucks, all these Amazon trucks are not the only truck they're delivering Amazon products. You've got UPS trucks. Heck, you may have gotten deliveries from a guy in a Toyota Camry before. There's all types of people and places and companies that are delivering these products for Amazon. But what UPS has recognized is that we are making like almost no money. We're taking all this risk. We need to cut down the low profit stuff that we're doing. And I don't want to go on too much of a side note here, but I just want to talk to all the sales guys out there. Without going on too much of a tangent, I'll just say that this is, I think, an important concept to really understand about what's happening now. All the low profit, low margin stuff that we're seeing is starting to be automated. So like we're seeing here that UPS saying, hey, we want out of this low profit, low margin delivery. We're seeing the same thing in the sales world. Companies are saying, we don't really want sales guys selling low profit stuff, low margin stuff. We can use AI and automation to do that. If you're a sales guy, you should really be focused on how can I sell higher ticket, more complex enterprise B2B type stuff. So anyway, I just think that there's an interesting trend that we're seeing in the market right now. And if you're subscribed to the channel, you would know this because we're covering these trends and important workforce changes on a regular basis. So if you're not and you want to be up to date with what's happening in the market, smash that subscribe button. Anyway, the other thing that we see happening here at UPS is the theory that there was too much hiring. They overhired during the COVID bubble. During COVID, everybody was staying at home. You couldn't even go to a Walmart. Do you remember that when you couldn't actually go to the store? You couldn't actually walk into a Walmart and buy something? I remember, and it was gross. I remember having to put a mask on my 3-year-old's face. I remember, gosh, I'm going off a little tangent here. I remember there was a woman working at an insurance office that I was managing at that time. She had to bring her 8-year-old son to work all day to learn on a Zoom call. Let me tell you something, that did not work. And by the way, another quick, I'm going off a little bit of a tangent here, sorry. We don't even know the full ramifications of having 2.5 years of no school for these kids. The educational dilution that occurred during that time is going to have ramifications for decades to come. Anyway, I don't want to go into all that. All I'm trying to point out here is that, well, during COVID, there was less delivery, there were more deliveries happening. And so that's a theory. But at the same time, like that was 4 years ago. And they already terminated 48,000 jobs last year. So while that is a popular theory, I don't know if I'd put all the weight on that, although I'd say that there is some proportion of that. Now, one thing that is, I think, important to note here is that UPS has a unionized labor force, the Teamsters, and the unions typically result in higher fixed labor costs, less flexibility, and slower adoption of technology. You just can't, because you have an agreement with all your employees that you can't do that. And obviously there are some protections for employees, and we're going to cover that in a little moment, because there's a double-edged sword. At any rate, due to unionization, it makes it much more difficult for a company like UPS to fire people and replace them with AI and robotics. In fact, the CFO said that many of the cuts will come from not filling jobs when part-time workers leave the company. And I think this is an interesting move. You know, over the holidays, there's lots of deliveries. It's Christmas season, you gotta buy all these gifts and stuff. And so we covered this on the channel as well, and I shared some links. There was a lot of part-time work available to do deliveries during that time. Well, now that the holidays are over, should tell my wife, by the way, because she still keeps buying stuff online. Anyway, now the holidays are over, there's less deliveries happening. Again, someone give my wife the memo. Do you have that issue where your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, just keeps buying stuff on Amazon? You've got like a pile of boxes? Yeah, maybe I'm the only one. I don't know. Leave it in the comments below if that happens to you. Anyway, so what does this mean? Well, what UPS is doing here is that when part-time workers quit, typically they would replace them. They're not doing that now. They're saying, okay, instead of backfilling and replacing those spots immediately, we're just going to intentionally leave those jobs empty. And we're going to leverage automation and the existing strategy of reducing the amount of low profit deliveries. We're going to leverage those tools and that overall strategy and just leave those jobs blank. And by the way, I don't know if they're going to stop at 30,000 jobs this year. Technology is moving so fast. Just think about how far we've come over the last 12 months. Now, the unionization is very interesting, and I also think probably one of the reasons why UPS isn't as loud and vocal about attributing layoffs to AI. One of the things that we've talked about on the channel as well is that companies will, if they have a bad quarter or a bad fiscal year, they'll lay off people, but they'll actually spin it. Instead of saying, hey, we had a bad year, we need to lay off people because we're on a down cycle. Instead of saying that, they'll say, hey, we're laying off people because we're innovative, we're using the new technology, we're going to be more streamlined and more efficient, and we're AI forward, and we're forward thinking. And that type of change in messaging can lead to increases in stocks rather than decreases. Not all the time, but it's a strategy that we definitely see implemented. However, UPS isn't saying that in this case. And I think that part of the reason for that is because they're saying, well, because all of our workers are unionized, we actually can't be announcing that we're replacing them with AI. Perfect example of the flip side would be something like Salesforce, where Mark Benioff said, well, we're laying off half of our customer service staff because AI agents can handle those tasks. And we covered that in an entire video. I'll post a link to that video right here so you can watch how Salesforce handled it. UPS doesn't have the ability to do that because of the unions. So I do want to take a closer look at AI and automation, because I think that AI and automation plays a much larger role here in the logistics in the warehouse world than UPS is letting on. Because again, while UPS doesn't specifically blame or credit AI with the layoffs, they repeatedly mention that automation, network optimization, and tech-enabled efficiency are major priorities for their company. And we covered this in a video as well. Warehouses are becoming exceedingly filled with robots. We covered this in a video. Amazon now has over 1 million robots in warehouses. In fact, they are very close. They might have actually surpassed it at this point, very close to having more robots in factories than human beings. And that is a huge, I think, moment. And please believe, it's not just Amazon that's doing this. It's certainly Walmart, FedEx, UPS, all the companies are using robotics and automation to optimize their warehouses. In fact, there was a comment from someone on the channel, this is maybe a year ago, where I shared a video of what was happening with Walmart. And this guy said, well, I'm a warehouse worker and a robot couldn't do my job, couldn't take my job. Well, here we are a year later and we have millions of robots in warehouses. And I don't really see any reason why that would stop happening. In fact, Amazon, in a kind of like a leaked internal memo, announced that they plan to replace over 600,000 jobs in warehouses with robots over the coming years. Covered that in a video too. So if you're subscribed, you would already know this. Now, all this warehouse stuff, that doesn't even get into autonomous and self-driving vehicles. We already see Waymo and robotaxis showing a lot of promise. They're getting to less accidents than humans. You know as just as well as I do that humans cannot drive, at least not drive very well. I was driving with my kids the other day, and we were talking about the dangers of going out into the world. And I said, well, you know, you shouldn't really be afraid of, I can't remember what it was they were afraid of, something like a shark attack or something. I said, you shouldn't be afraid of a shark attack because statistically it's just not going to happen. In fact, you're actually statistically much more likely to die in a car accident. It's very dangerous to drive cars. And they're like, well, then why do we drive cars? It's not worth the risk. I said, well, if we didn't drive cars, we wouldn't be able to get anywhere. Anyway, the reality is that self-driving cars are much, much safer than, say, some stoned 19-year-old on his smartphone browsing Spotify. So Waymo and robotaxis and all these autonomous vehicles that are used for livery and transporting humans are becoming much more common. But we also see this used in the transportation field for delivery of products as well. Aurora Innovation, Kodiak Robotics are already doing self-driving vehicles on highways. I don't see any reason why that would stop or slow. That is the future. I think if you asked me, you've got, I think it's roughly 7 to 8 million people that make a living from transporting goods. Within 10 years, I don't see any of those jobs being around anymore. Self-driving technology is very, very impressive. However, that brings us back full circle to what's happening at UPS. Notably at UPS, all of their drivers are unionized. None of their drivers are being laid off. They're all safe for now. Because on paper, and this is where it gets interesting, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. There's gonna be differing thoughts in here in the comments. Our community, guys, is not angry. We're not, I'd like to think that we as a community are open to additional ideas and facts, and we're not super emotional. I'm not going to just come in here and just pound you with pro-union or anti-union rhetoric. That's not the way that we operate, guys. We're men, we're smart, we look at the facts, we look at the data, we look at the news stories, we look at the press release, we take in all the information and we try to find the truthful, messy middle. And I want to hear your comments below. In any event, getting back to the point here, UPS drivers are all unionized, and so they're safe for now. They are not being laid off. And on paper, that sounds great. It sounds like great protection for all the employees. But the problem here is that as this self-driving technology, as this AI and robotics gets better and better and better, this becomes a huge problem for both the workers and for a company like UPS. Because the problem here is that if UPS is not able to adapt and remove workers and replace them with technology, at least in some sort of safe and rational and smart way, UPS is gonna go bankrupt. They're just not gonna be able to compete with the competitors and other companies that are using self-driving technology. Now, it's possible that the unions are able, if all the drivers across all these companies are unionized, that, well, maybe self-driving for trucks gets delayed. But in my opinion, it's only a matter of time. So what does all that mean? Well, just like with every industry, delivery, warehouses, logistics, everything is being impacted by artificial intelligence and robotics. And so we're in a very important point in time where guys like you and me need to be adapting and learning new skills. We need to be solving new problems. The problems that we've been solving over the last 10 years are not gonna be the problems that we're solving in the future. I'm in marketing, guys. I help companies run ads. I help people generate leads through Google SEO and through Meta and through YouTube and all these different places. But the reality is that a lot of these companies are using AI to replace that type of a role. Now, I'm aware of this. I've accepted it. I realize that the roles that I've served in the past are probably not the roles I'm going to serve in the future. And I would encourage you to start thinking about the way you live that way. And certainly by subscribing to the channel, keeping up with this news is a really, really important step in the right future. Because I want guys like you and me to stay relevant, respected, and financially free, because our families, our communities, our country, our world requires on strong men like us to lead the way. All right, boys, that's all I've got for today. If you like today's video, you will definitely want to watch yesterday's video where we talk about just another company with massive layoffs. Check it out here. Lots of lessons to be shared. I'll see you there, boys. Peace.